Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the generally accepted fact in the mainstream sports nutrition world that higher carb diets are generally considered to be better for athletic and fit people. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skill at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And this is something that becomes controversial, and it's always ironic because I'm the one who seems to have to talk about this when keto diets are swinging back through YouTube fitness again. And people are like, well, you're not ripped, why should I listen to you? Well, because I also wasn't ripped for the year that I was full ketogenic diet while on YouTube. If I didn't get ripped on a ketogenic diet, then wouldn't that be proof that it doesn't have any magical properties? I want people to think about that. They actually come in and be like, why should I follow this? I'm going to do the opposite of what you're doing, which is a high carb diet because you're not ripped. But I'm not any fatter on a 70%, probably 60 to 70% carb diet than I was on an 80% fat diet. I am not any leaner, or I wasn't any leaner then than I am now. I had less muscle. I've regained a bunch of muscle since I've gone back on higher carbs, but my waistline hasn't increased. So what does that tell you about the ketogenic diets? I didn't get ripped on it, so if people want to use me as the example, which is silly, then I'm proof that ketogenic diets don't do anything other than suppress some people's appetite, right? That's all it would prove. I mean, if you want to use me as an example, use me as the correct example that ketogenic diets don't work that well. How's that? Now, that aside, this isn't about me. This isn't about what I have to say. This has to do with what all the top experts out there have to say. I mean, listen to anyone. Go look up anyone with an advanced degree who regularly talks to the fitness community who discusses these diets. You're going to find for every person with an advanced degree who thinks ketogenic diets are okay or acceptable or in some cases might be superior for athletic people, you're going to find 10 to 20 experts who say the opposite. So, that's what people need to consider. Think about scientific consensus there. Much as I might dislike Lane Norton, he pushes high carb diets. Alan Aragon pushes high carb diets. Eric Helms pushes high carb diets. Do any of these people have trouble getting any of their clients to win competitions of various types, whether it's physique related or athletic related on high carb diets? No. Far as I know, most of their clients do pretty well, don't they? They all do pretty well, yet they all follow these high carb diets. The overwhelming majority of sports nutritionists in the world will tell you you're going to have usually better athletic performance, that's part of fitness, and better body composition on higher carb, lower to moderate fat diets. All right? That's the consensus, and that's from working with tons of athletes. Do you know who does better on ketogenic diets? People with insulin resistance. People who have metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance who are morbidly obese oftentimes do better on ketogenic diets. It controls their appetite better. In some cases, it offers a tiny metabolic advantage. Everyone else does better when you put them in a lab. They end up with better body composition, better strength on higher carb diets. All right? They do better when you put them in a lab. And people always try to say, well, when I do that, no, we don't care about what you think you did. Because you didn't track it, honestly, because if you did and you produce those results, you should probably be kidnapped by scientists to figure out what's wrong with you, because you're the only person in the world who has this problem. Tons of people have this problem when they say they have the problem, but when you put them in a laboratory, it magically disappears. And that's the problem, and the keto experts aren't talking about that. They're not admitting that that's the case. When you go look at lab-controlled studies where the scientists get to measure and control everything you eat and keep a camera on you 24 hours a day so that you can't cheat, people who do ultra-high carb diets, they don't gain body fat without a massive caloric surplus. And it's because people are mistaking oftentimes carbs with high sugar, high fat foods, like combined together. That's usually your big culprit. Well, every time I eat carbs, I binge and I gain a ton of weight, a ton of body fat. Then you look at their carbs. Their carbs aren't whole wheat pasta. They're not even white rice. They're not potatoes. Their carbs are a cake, ice cream, pie. Those are all high fat foods. They're high sugar foods, but they're also really high fat foods also. That's a deadly combination. That's a combination that's going to be a problem for people who don't have ultra high energy turnovers. But truth be told, most athletes perform better on higher carbs. Higher carb diets, you gain less body fat even when you're overeating. So if you have diets that at the same caloric intake usually cause less fat gain, when you're overeating to improve performance, and they produce better performance, strength, things like that, it should be obvious that's kind of the way to go. Now, you're going to be like, well, Dr. Jeff Volek or whatever, he promotes higher fat diets. Yeah, but he's not always promoting ketogenic diets. He's saying that endurance athletes benefit from adding large amounts of carbs and fat together oftentimes. They follow high fat diets because at a certain threshold, you can only get so many hours of fuel from carbohydrates. But I promise you, most of you guys out there are not training more than 2 to 3 hours a day, tops, even including your list cardio. Very few of you are doing more than 2 hours of exercise a day, 7 days a week. Very, very few of you. So if that's you, that doesn't apply to you. That data on higher fat diets isn't for people who exercise 2 hours a day or less. It shouldn't even, you're not even in the ballpark. When you start passing 4 hours, 5 hours a day, that's what they're talking about. That's what that data is looking at. And people need to understand that difference. Yes, for ultra high endurance, fat at a certain threshold becomes a superior fuel source, and it can help mitigate the loss of glycogen stores and performance because you've got fat to burn for fuel. If you don't have enough body fat, and obviously if you're an endurance athlete, you probably don't have much fat to tap into. Yeah, you've got to have a fuel source, and carbohydrate stores in your muscles can only go so far. But, for people who are training a couple hours a day, this doesn't apply to you at all. And in fact, when it comes to higher intensity work, basically weightlifting, higher intensity cardio, GPP work, loaded carries, farmers walks, that burns purely carbohydrates as fuel. Those are carb burning exercises. They're glucose burning. You don't burn any body fat or dietary fat in the middle of those type of training. All right, you're burning purely glucose. You might get an afterburn effect that starts burning body fat or dietary fat, but the training itself is purely glucose based. All right, you need glycogen stores for that, and that comes from dietary carbs. And what people need to consider, the same thing, they try to appeal to expertise or to the elite, and then they say, well, this top athlete or that top athlete follows this type of diet. Yeah, but are they even close to a majority? Meaning, are they so good and so successful that they're still performing well in spite of their diet or because of it? Because the reality is, for every champion you find who follows a low-carb diet in any sport in the world, you will find 20 or 30 who are probably in their league who follow high-carb diets. They are a tiny minority. People who are successful low-carb athletes are probably at best in any sport no more than 5 to 10% of the field, in some cases 1% of the playing field. Again, rather than use the extreme example, people need to step back and say, well, wait, what do the majority of the elite athletes do? The successful ones who are winning, the majority of them follow very, very high carb diets in most sports. In most sports. So again, what does that tell you? The fittest people on earth, the most athletic people on earth usually follow really high carb diets. There's a reason the top experts put people on those type of diets. They perform better. They end up with better body composition. They end up with better athletic performance. So if your goal is overall fitness, that's the sort of diet you should be leaning towards, not ketogenic diets. Ketogenic diets are generally a crutch for people with certain types of appetite issues who struggle with appetite. They work for some people in controlling your total caloric intake, but that's it. They can help mitigate excessive caloric intake, but they also reduce performance. They reduce muscle mass. People lose more muscle even when dieting on ketogenic diets versus higher carb diets, and study after study after study has confirmed that. The majority of the studies show that. Only a small minority show it the other way. And when people cherry pick it, well, I found a study, yeah, but if you can find 5 or 10 that show the opposite, there's a problem. And ultimately what you find, that people who are successful on the ketogenic diets for even getting ripped and maintaining muscle mass, they usually use a pretty hefty amount of gear to maintain that muscle and that fullness. That's how they get away with it. Most people, it's not going to work that way. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative. and I will talk to you guys next time.